Nothing dda. I'm talsku vi annars on you. Some talsku faking. I'm glad to see such a huge crowd turning out here. Before we say anything else, can you just give a round of appreciation for the catering squad that produced that spread outside there? It was... No, it is very good to see such a crowd, and it's good to see apparently there's about 200 people, including the people online, who are joining us, so they'll get a chance to contribute later as well as we go through. We're going to go through in a stepwise fashion just now. John's going to come up and give his presentation first, and I'll come and say a few words, and then we move over to the Meister D and the place to finish off. So, can we just do it in the same format? We'll do the three presentations, the three sort of short talks, and then we'll take all the questions at the end. So don't want to forget anything as we go through there. Make a note to yourself or make a chart, because I think it is about encouraging more dialogue and more discussion in this topic as it goes through. Okay, so John, would you like to come up and give your presentation? You can introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm John Hamilton. Some of you, well, I know lots of familiar faces out there today, so welcome. I'm going to be talking on behalf of my Croft 44 Ranish, and also on behalf of Lewis and Harris horticulture producers, as I was the food coordinator for the last year. But sadly that funding is coming to an end this month, so we'll be hoping to find new funding next year and bringing back the work that they have been carrying out. So the future of food sovereignty on the Outer Hebrides, what is food sovereignty and why does it matter? It's power to the people to control and define their own food systems, from the agricultural techniques they use, how they distribute the food, and who consumes the food. It gives people the right to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced in ecological, sound and sustainable methods. It puts people at the heart of food systems and policy making. It defines the interest and security for the next generation. It gives freedom of choice and offers a strategy to dismantle and move away from corporate trade and current food regimes. So why support local production here on the islands? For the last few hundred years, humans have developed food systems that sustain populations disconnected with land and the environment. We're looking at things non-holistically, with approaches based on capitalization. There's too many middle people taking profits, not considering the quality and the population's health. Supporting local food not only reduces waste, it also supports the economy locally, and most importantly, improves the health and well-being of the population. For thousands of years, humans have sustained local food systems to provide all their needs, both here on the island and across and around the world. And it's only in the last few decades that we've really lost the skills of how to grow our own food and feed our own families. And this is why supporting local will help bring back those cultural losses. What could sustainable production look like here? Small-scale, face-to-face, hands-on approach. Human-powered, small-scale food systems. Across the Outer Hebrides, there's a population of around 26,000 people. We have about 6,000 crofts across the Outer Hebrides. And those crofts range from anywhere from about 4 acres in size to about 40 acres. Plus, on top of that, there's farmland and common grazings. So if you do a quick calculation, you can work out that if you just produce the food on the croft land, you'd only need to produce enough food for 4.3 people per croft, which works out roughly 4,000 square meters per person. So not a lot of land for each individual to produce the food you need. But this isn't including the farmland and the common grazing we have. If we support sustainable production, we'll improve the growth of the culture, the mindset around local food, and over time build a resilient environment. So how is sustainable production being achieved here on the Isle of Lewis and Harris? The Lewis and Harris Horticulture Producers is a group that's been running for over 27 years. They were established by local crofters and local growers who wanted to find an outlet for their produce. They came together and formed a constitution based on volunteers, and they run the local market weekly in Percival Square, where they can sell their produce to anybody who wants it. They fund positions over the many years. They funded food coordinator positions, which I was lucky enough to have the privilege of running for the last year. And as part of that position, we've organized workshops, growing events. We organize an annual horticultural show that publicizes and promotes the growth of local produce and also showcases what is possible here in this harsh climate. It collaborates, engages with other organizations to support the food system. We work with the Scottish Crofting Federation, we work with Farm Advisory Service, we access funding through the co-op, through National Lottery. We support schools and children connecting with growing food. Just last week on Friday, I gave a workshop, a morning's workshop with Tong School. I think I saw the whole school in total. We did 4 small workshops with the children, and we focused it on compost and working organically without chemicals. And the children really enjoyed connecting with the products that you could use to make compost and engaging with ready-made, finished compost full of worms and life. They had great fun finding worms in my homemade compost. So local produce, this is the Saturday market, and you can see here the range of produce that is produced on the island, from potatoes through to fresh fruits, things like raspberries and plums, things that you wouldn't necessarily think could be grown here on the islands. They also produce preserves, things like jams and chutneys, and people produce eggs for local sale. There's also homemade bread, and people grow plants that you can buy. So if you're a keen gardener looking for locally produced hardy plants, then this is the place to come. They sell vegetables that you can plant directly in the garden, or you can buy vegetables that have been grown and produced by them. They're a group that is founded from volunteers. Everything they do is run by volunteers. The Saturday market is set up weekly and then run by volunteers to sell produce to locals. The allotments have been set up for many years. These are behind the Castle College. There's 27 allotments in total, and they were set up to give access to the community, somewhere for them to grow, a space where they could produce their own food, experiment, create a community, work with other growers, and develop skills in growing their own produce. The annual horticultural show. This is the horticultural show that's run every year. It was in the town hall this year. And it's a great way of showcasing the produce that can be grown. In the foreground of this photo, we have a plate with some aubergines on it, which is quite a tropical vegetable to grow here on the island. But thanks to sort of modern tunnels and polycrubs, these are now possible to grow here. And there's a big range of vegetables right across the tables there, which showcase what is possible on this island, and also the quality that can be grown. So growing local isn't just about growing dirty vegetables that are poor quality. You can grow good quality local vegetables that outcompete the market producers. The main work of the LHHP is to connect with the community, to try and encourage horticulture across the Outer Hebrides. And they run workshops across the year, and over many, many decades, they've been organizing workshops and events. So just this year, we had a huge turnout. So I set up some events at the beginning of the year, focusing on market gardening mainly, growing vegetables at home. And we had a wonderful couple from Skye, West Coast Organics, who run a market garden full-time as their income. They then ran a series of seminars, which we had over 200 attendees across the 4 seminars, and a huge turnout on the first event. We were playing sardines in the third sector room. We had 50 people in a room that was only big enough for about 30. So if anybody was along to that, we apologize and we'll try and make more space next time. But the workshops have been a huge, huge way of connecting with the community and engaging in horticulture. 44 Ranish. So as an example, Croft, I'm 44 Ranish. We have a small, diverse croft building resilience. We focus on holistic approaches, improving biodiversity, building topsoil and fertility. We work with other organisations such as CAGS, Farm Advisory Service, Scottish Crofting Federation, and the Forestry Grant Scheme to support our croft projects. We host volunteers and share experiences and connect worldwide. We also open tours and run public events to share our knowledge and our experience. 8 years ago, there was nothing. We had a bare ground croft, rough grassland, rusting fences, and there was no shelter or production on the croft. 8 years of hard work, careful planning, trial and error, experiment, lots of failure, we've managed to produce a croft that now looks like this. We now have a market garden established where we can produce produce throughout the whole season to make sales locally to restaurants, cafes, the local market, and also direct to customers. We have rotational mob grazing, we have native woodlands for shelter, we have holistic poultry, and we also engage with the community. Our market garden produces over 35 different varieties of produce in the summer season, and we focus on building healthy, fertile soils. We have woodland creation. We've planted over 15,000 trees in the first 3 years when we moved to our croft. Some of these trees will not survive, but many will. It'll take many years for these trees to mature, and they will outlive me. But the project will grow and the land will diversify, both in biodiversity, but also in crofting activities. Something that I will pass on to the next generation. Holistic poultry is something that we consider to be very easy to do. Poultry across the UK is kept in harsh conditions in agriculture buildings with thousands and thousands of birds crammed in, but they're very easy to rotate through the landscape. They can follow grazing animals, like mob grazing, which builds soil structure, improves grassland, and is very easy to mimic on a small scale. The workshops we carry out help to connect with the community and gain these traditional skills that have been lost and help people to improve on their own crofting skills. Croft tours and open days is something that we've run for the last 5 or 6 years and has been the main way that we've connected with the community. So what could the future of food security and sovereignty look like for the islands? An increase in growth across local networks, a collaboration across all sectors from crofters to policymakers, funding to support new and current projects, a promotion and engagement of the wider community, development of crofts and farms offering workshops and trainings so that people can gain the skills that they need to grow, increase in crofters selling sustainable local produce, leading to a development of food hubs and cooperatives to sell directly to customers. And this will lead to an increase in demand for local produce. Thank you for listening. I've been John Hamilton, speaking on behalf of Lewis and Harris Horticulture Producers.
You'll be glad to know I haven't got any slides. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Frank Rennie, Galson, South Galson, as we all know as the centre of the world. When I was asked to do this, I was thinking about, it's good to see so many faces that I recognise actually, and some new faces that we don't recognise. There are new people coming in here, and quite a few former students in rural development, so it's good to see you. One thing that really occurs to me is I had a visitor a couple of weeks ago, an old friend from university days, 50 years ago. And we got on talking about climate change. This is an intelligent person who has worked his long life in science-related topics. And we had some ferocious arguments on climate change. He has a geological perspective, as do I. So we know that climate change is not new. It's happened for millennia, 3,000 million years in this part of the world for that sort of thing through. We disagreed about the potential sources of the climate change. And he was asking basically, what does it matter really? So it prompted me to think about this particular talk and try to join some of these dots as to why it does matter. The issues of climate change tend to be very, very large and very complex. And it's not without any surprise that some people think, what can I do? What the hell can I do in this? This is beyond me. I don't know how many CFC gases are in the atmosphere. I don't know, what the global energy requirement for running this company is. But they are quite critical for every single person. And because they're they're very often single issues, we don't join the dots to make these things to see what is a bigger picture. So with my friend a couple of weekends ago, we went through some of the issues just because we knew each other. We could say anything to each other and without falling out. Transportation is a big thing for us, of course, not just the ferries, but it's happening more regularly now that there are disruptions. And even with a fair wind to Calmac, there are many things that they cannot prevent in terms of the climate changes. I was speaking to an old skipper just the other day there, who was telling me that many of the big storms that used to happen in between here and Iceland at sea have now drifted south, and we're getting them. So we're getting more frequent big storms, as we know from living here. And the weather that we used to get here has moved down south a little bit to sort of the middle of Ireland, in about Armagh, or in about there somewhere, in that area there. So these things are beyond our ken, and that's what it says. The potential for changing some of these things is quite huge. So it's not just about missed connections and missed appointments. And we know ourselves how quickly the shops will empty if there are a few freight ferries that don't go. If you remember back to 2010, when the volcano erupted in Iceland and they shut down the air traffic space, then there were riots and fist fights further south as supermarkets emptied and could not be replenished. But it's more than just that. It's about the health issues. It's about getting from here to Raigmore or Glasgow for critical appointments living in the islands. And not being able to do that affects the state of mind and the comfort people have living in places like this. We talked about EV cars, so I won't go into that again just now, but it's always been beyond my comprehension why the local authority has put so much emphasis over the years in the interconnector with the mainland. I realise that's important. I realise that's the main game in town, but the use of local energy locally must surely be a key issue in the future. Local hubs. It happens in other parts of the world, being able to use the power to charge EV vehicles, to convert the whole fleet of buses for schools, etc., into electric vehicles, to provide cheap electric for doctors' surgeries and hospitals and so on that are dependent on giving a public good. But it's not just the transport. The housing issue is a key thing. It was mentioned briefly in passing. I think it was Gemma was talking about this. We're looking at a high aged stock of houses in the islands very often with poor insulation. We have with the highest fuel poverty incidence in the country, in the UK, here. That's the amount of money you spend just to be able to heat your house and provide your power locally and whatnot. So there's a huge deficit that can be recovered in that sense there. The increasing disruption to those systems, I mean, you think, oh great, we live in a windy place and we've got all these turbines coming in there. The turbines shut down when the wind is too temperamental, when the too is unpredictable. They cannot continue very often if there's going to be a switch change of wind as it goes through. So it isn't quite as straightforward as shove a turbine up and it works. Okay, there are multiple problems within this that link through, and the increased prevalence of strong gales, strong winds, actually in some cases may prevent the use of sustainable local electricity systems that we have to be aware of. If we're looking at terms of the natural environment, there's a huge issue within that as well. But I know from my own experience that birds are tending to nest earlier because of climate change and further north. So birds that used to live in nests further south are moving up within the area. You might not think that's a problem, but it's a problem if the ecology is out of kilter and the animals, the birds in this case, don't have the food that they normally have at that time of year when they reach here. This year, or last year actually, for the first time I noticed that I have a particular interest in merlins, if you don't know. And the merlins in our area, I noted definitely for the first time, did not migrate. They did not leave. So they're staying here I saw them every month of the year. So they're choosing to stay here because it's perhaps the warmer weather, but also they have starlings and blackbirds and whatnot and sparrows to feed on. So there's a change to the ecology that's taken place, which we can't control. Coastal erosion is the big one that we focus on, but there are many more environmental factors. I know Mary-Ann will be talking about, I'm involved in a project in Barra, and you'll hear about that later, using natural systems, nature-based systems to try and resolve some of the climate issues. Because even things like building the causeway, Vatasay or the Eriskay Causeway and whatnot, produces a tremendous good to us in terms of travel and commuting distance and so on, but it also sets up unanticipated problems because it diverts the ocean flow to different areas. So some areas that were stable are now unstable, and some areas that were unstable in the past are now building up to actually accrete land and accrete sand in some areas. Things like sea level change may, again, it's been going on over geological time, so it's not a big surprise. But in terms of the effect that this can have, it may not have the effect within our lifetime. So it tends to be well, let somebody else worry about that, which is fine until you think about the damage that it will do to coastal roads. Some of these coastal roads will be undermined and destroyed. We're already looking at plans for graveyards to be eaten into by coastal erosion. We're looking at the whole problem about having to deal with localized, but national and international problems on a local scale, and how do you communicate that? So the issues of climate change are not just about mitigation, about trying to stop this and trying to reduce greenhouse gases and so on. It's not just about adaptation, which is about how we cope with that sort of stuff, with things we can't stop. It's also about education. Because so often we're talking about issues that we don't even know what's happening in the next village or the next island or further down the road about how they've dealt with these things or solutions that are possible, or even are they a problem in the first place? So things like this, meetings like this are good to get these things aired and get discussed because that's a huge issue in the long term. It will affect the economy in every one of those ways. It will affect businesses, it will affect new building abilities, it will affect the ability to actually maintain what we have got. In that case, you can imagine it wouldn't take much push to encourage people who don't want to live here to move and thereby furthering changing the demography in this place. We already have issues of population growth and control and shrinkage and so on. which are long-term problems. But it wouldn't take very much realization to realize why you're going to move there if your house is twice to 3 times the price to build, if it means you're going to have to miss a crucial hospital appointment with a specialist, and so on and so forth. So the whole issue of working around waste management, we heard it on about energy conservation, energy use and whatnot, it ties in together. One of my big concerns in terms of, and we can't cover all these things today, one of my big concerns is, although I think there are bright spots on the horizon, like the polycrubs, for example, we have a couple of polycrubs, and that is definitely a future, because we get a lot of sunshine here, and we have very poor soil, but we can grow a lot if it's undercover and so on and so forth. So that should be a huge boost. One of the big concerns is the focus, for example, on carbon capture. A lot of that is just smoke and mirrors. It's speculation, it's complete nonsense. It's talked about by people who think they can make a fast buck. And all of a sudden, the peatlands, which have been, we have the second largest intact peat bog in Europe on our doorstep in central Lewis-Moor. If that is the target of corporate business who want to move in and buy the rights for carbon capture, what does that say for communities? Can communities benefit from that? Will communities suffer from that by moving in there? Are there going to be restrictions about about what we can do, what you can move in these things there? A lot of this thing is pure speculation. It's like dealing in the futures market, where I speculate on what it will cost to buy bananas from Puerto Rico in 2030. I don't know what the price is any more than you do, but people make fortunes out of that by hedging their bets as to whether it will work or not work. I've just come back from the Faroe Islands and holiday in Faroes. Really, I'm just blown away by the network of tunnels they've constructed between the islands, which charge you automatically as you drive through, and it goes through. Now, I get it's a different geology, I understand that completely. But these are funded by the Faroese government. These are not largely through European funding. The commitment and the long-term vision that they've put into linking up these things there, which makes them able to avoid the vagrancies of adverse weather, must surely be a thing we look at in the future. If we're looking at coastal protection, we have come a long way from the idea of just burying shishes on the beach and covering them with sand, because we know that doesn't work. We want to look at how these things work in the longer term for the benefit of local communities, because what we're sitting on is a national asset, a national treasure. It always confuses me that we talk about investment in roads, but subsidy of crofters. Why did we not talk about subsidy of roads and investment in crofters? My dad used to say, when was the army ever last to make a profit in the last term? There are certain things that are for the public good that should be put back into the public good. And so there are key issues within these communities where public investment could benefit the public, not necessarily individuals, but indirectly it will benefit businesses and thereby families and so on within the place. I'm going to be talking in a couple of weeks' time at the European Rural Parliament. One of the things we're measuring on there is the European legislation, which has been formed just now, is what's known as a right to remain. A right to remain. So actually working constructively, positively across rural areas in Europe to encourage and to enable young people to remain in those areas should they choose. It's not about stopping them going. I worked in the UHI for many years, and it wasn't about preventing young people from leaving. It was about giving the alternative if they don't want to go. And I think that is a key issue within. So all these things link up in terms of the complex pattern of climate change. Climate change is not simply, the sort of stuff you'll hear from, David Branson and all that sort of stuff on television. It is skewed by misinformation in the public domain. We have a huge voice from a small community, generally of extreme right-wingers, who deny the science that we're talking about. And this is compended by even reputable, newspapers and media stations and whatnot. 95% of scientists agree climate is changing, and the BBC bring on Nigel Lawson to refute the argument, who knows nothing about science and nothing about climate change. It's absurd. And under no sensible system of governance would that be allowed to happen. So we need to actually say the emphasis on climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and education lies with each individual, all of us here. And if we take one message away from that, from today, that would be my message. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Frank. And, talk about sharpening the pitchforks. I mean, you're absolutely right. And we do have to have these conversations. And this is what I've alluded to all morning, really. By having these conversations amongst ourselves and then getting these conversations going in all our villages and communities and towns across the islands, that's how we can really fulfill that education part. But that also then leads directly into what actual actions can happen on both mitigation and adaptation. So I'm going to be talking this morning about building food resilience really in the islands, but we can't really talk about that until we've considered climate adaptation as one actual aspect of discussion. And what I mean by climate adaptation is the climate change that's already happened, the merlins that are here all year round, the other species, biodiversity threats that we're facing as island communities that are already here. What do we need to do to fix those? And I know that Calla, for example, Chief Officer from the local authority, is going to be talking about infrastructure later on. But it's also about your Croft. It's also about, the impact on Melinda's business when the boat doesn't come to bring the meats up from Storest Uist. And that means she can't produce the products that week. And all of these things are interconnected, and we have to understand the importance of each of these things in our community. So I'm going to talk about building island food resilience. I mentioned about climate adaptation. I may have, in fact, got one of the slides around the wrong way, so you'll forgive me. But what do we know? What we do know, between 1961 and 1990, this is the average rainfall, for example, and the average temperatures by Uist, Barra and Lewis. And all of these slides will be made available on the Climate Hebrides website after the event, so you'll be able to see those. There's also presentations that we have on our YouTube channel by Dr. James Pope from the Met Office, who's a senior climate scientist who has produced the data that appears on these slides. But effectively what you're looking at, if you try and, for those of you who are in Uist, have a look at the Uist temperatures, and I'm going to show you what the projected temperatures are going to be and the projected rainfall are going to be in a second. So focus in on whichever one you want for those of you in the audience, and I'll be asking questions immediately afterwards, so make sure you remember them. And this is what we're looking at from 2061 through to 2080. So if you look, for example, I stay in Stornoway, you're looking at temperature changes of an increase of around 2 degrees during the winter. You've got a rainfall increase of an average. These are average figures, and how those averages are calculated are within the brackets. So you're looking about additional rainfall in the winter periods, which is fairly consistent, although it gets worse when you get further south. And so you can see for yourselves, for those of you who are able to see the slide relatively easily. So, for example, in the summer for Uist, there's a potential of a drop by 21% of rainfall, or at a more drastic level, or a less drastic level, 10%, but with an average of around 18%. So these things are coming, and this is what the Met Office, the scientists are able to say, and they're able to get projections down to very small localised areas across the islands. So we met Frank, it has been mentioned already today about the Community Planning Partnership. And we've done a considerable amount of work through the Community Planning Partnership with the Met Office, with local partners and actors. The local authority has been immensely proactive in providing data and information and collaboration. And you'll hear, in fact, from local authority colleagues a bit later on. We also ourselves have conducted, again through the Community Planning Partnership, and with our colleagues at Sniffer, or now Verture, but they deliver Adaptation Scotland. We developed our climate story map, which is in English and in Gaelic, and you can go on, the link is on the bottom of the slide. Again, if you come to climatehebrides.com website, you'll be able to get a link to the map there as well, and you can pin directly on your map either examples of where you've had climate or weather threats or ideas to fix something. So there's a brilliant guy in Uist, and Sarah's not in the room, otherwise she'll be able to tell me his name. I'm terrible with names. London people just call everyone mate for that reason, although I'm not a Londoner now, I'm an ex-Londoner. But the guy in Uist, he basically adapted the end of his croft by digging a slit trench, putting pallets in, and whenever the sand came up or a storm came in, the sand would be pushed in between the two pallets, and it was held together with rope that he found on the beach, and effectively it protected the end of his croft. So he adapted for 20 quid the end of his croft, and that was a crofter taking personal action on adaptation on his land. And it's really important to understand that people can do that as well as do Stornoway Airport and spend millions of pounds building up the end of the runway, or Benbecula Airport, for example. And in fact, speaking of airports, Barra Airport is going to need works fairly soon, and I know that their manager is looking into that at the moment. And I think James from Highlands and Islands Airport Limited is in the room somewhere, and I'm frantically looking. There he is, give us a wave. And he'll be able to talk to James. He'll tell you about some of the work that they've done on adaptation to the current infrastructure to make sure that we as residents can still use it. But on that map, you'll see examples right across the island chain, hundreds of them. So I do encourage you to do that. I mentioned the Community Planning Partnership. Climate Hebrides is clearly a member of that, as are the local authority, Community Land Outer Hebrides, Nature Scot, a whole range of other actors. We've produced already a case for action and a climate rationale, and all of the people that are involved in that body have signed up to those documents, and you can see those on our website, so climatehebrides.com. And I think at the moment the website is not there for the Community Planning Partnership because of the whole cyber attack. But you can get the documents from Climate Hebrides. And I think this is the important bit that Frank was many important bits that Frank was talking about, but one of them is that bit about the relationship. How are all of these things interrelated? And for example, we have the new economic strategy for the Caller, and that talks about local food production. And it also talks about the threat of climate change. So I encourage you, if you get an opportunity, go on the Caller's website. You will see the draft economic, or the current economic strategy, and which I think the local authority members have adopted. And that does talk about a climate threat, but it also talks about an opportunity, and I'm bringing this back to food, the opportunity for local food production and use. And it's absolutely essential that we all play a part in developing and delivering that economic strategy, because that comes back to things like the depopulation. Why would you want to stay in the islands as a young person? I'm trying not to look at my lovely friends over here who come to our conference every year. And the answer is because they personally want to do something about our island's future. And I know that they are personally committed. And in fact, have grilled the First Minister of Scotland in this very building just a few weeks ago on what his commitment to the islands are. But we need to be able to make sure that everybody can play a role, and whether that be producing their own food, whether that be running their own small business, whether that be in transport, moving food around, whether that be in community land organisations, facilitating, the local crofting community to be able to take more action. The economic development strategy, for example, talks about use of deer, and land trusts clearly play a role in deer management, but how do we sew that thread to make sure that the abattoir can be utilised, that make sure that Melinda can get access to venison directly from the land trust, to put money back into those land trusts, so that private enterprise and community land are working in collaboration. So we need to do more of that. Purchasing power is real. You know, there are thousands of tourism businesses in the islands. How many of them buy locally produced food? And that's a challenge to that industry. I'm saying it openly. I want to work with the Outer Hebrides tourism, for example, and I think Sarah McLean is in the room somewhere, and I don't know, maybe not at the moment. But, you know, these thousands of these small businesses could all be buying from Crofters, could all be buying from, you know, facilities that John has talked about. So let's encourage that. And I'll come back to facilities in a second. I'm talking about abstracts at the moment, but I'm going to narrow in with some possible solutions at the end of my talk. So what are people doing? You know, obviously John's talked about the Lewis and Harris horticultural producers. He's talked about the Croft 44, which I still haven't been able to come and see you. I promise you I will come and see you as soon as possible. But, you know, there's plenty of action going on for food growing. Most of the community land trusts and development trusts have some element of either direct food production themselves or obviously crofting in their communities as well. But, you know, I'm sorry that TAGSA aren't able to be here today, because I was hoping they'd be able to give us an update on their activities, and I'm hoping that some of their colleagues will be at UCVO just now to be able to maybe share some information with them. And if you are online, maybe you can ping us a message through the Teams chat or the Zoom call chat now. But TAGSA have been doing great work. They've looked at policy implications of people not being able to afford food. They've looked at, you know, the delivery mechanisms of getting food to and from the islands and holding big supermarkets feet to the fire. So they've done great work. We've got down in Barra, I was speaking to Mary Ann just last night, and you're going to hear from her a bit later on. You know, the lovely work of the Garra down in Barra there, in North Bay, I think it is. And, you know, they work with adults with special educational needs who are helping produce foods in the community. So there's that social dimension as well of actually encouraging participation by everybody in the room, which I think is a really important point. Horseshadow Community Development, they've got some, I'm being taking a liberty there. The picture on the right, or my left, far left, you'll see one of the cucumbers that I grew in the Horseshadow polycrub about 4 years ago. And I was longer than that, 6 years ago. And I was dating Melinda at the time, and I promised her some gherkins, which I didn't quite manage to do correctly. But nonetheless, the point is, this stuff's being grown, and everyone can have a go. Even simpletons like me can actually go in and produce things. And the joy of producing your own food and utilising your own food is absolutely immense. And yes, I have castrated lambs, which they didn't teach you in Brixton, but they do in Borth. And my dear friend Angus, who sadly died last year, was helping me how to shear sheep and things like that. But everyone can be involved in the community. We do have deer management, goose management schemes. Let's utilise that meat. I mentioned the Community Land Trust. Storris, I don't mean to have a pop at them, but they did a cull of rabbits in South Uist, and none of the meat ended up in the food chain. And you kind of think, well, hold on. You know, why would you do that? So let's utilise these meats. And I know Melinda's one example, but there are plenty of others. And yeah, the elephant in the room, Frank's already mentioned it, depopulation. It's absolutely essential. One of the things that we can do to encourage people to not only remain but flourish and encourage more people to come and share their lives in the islands is by supporting community food growing, small businesses, enterprise, social enterprise, not just capitalist enterprise, but social enterprise as well, and having them collaborating, and I'm going to come on to that in a second. Make it so that it's exciting. Make it interesting for people. Make it so that they can go, do you know what? I don't have to buy some pork that's come from an intensive farm in Denmark, and, you know, instead of which I can get it from the guy who was at the food festival on Saturday in Stornoway from Harris with his fantastic pork chops, which I had for dinner on Saturday night. So how do we make that happen? Let's improve facilities, okay? You know, let's get blast freezers deep freeze storage. Let's get vacuum pack machines in every community land trust area so that crofters can vacuum their produce, blast freeze it, get it into deep storage, collate it, set up cooperatives like John was talking about, where we can then, and promote more small business opportunities to create wealth in the community. Let's get those businesses decarbonised. Make sure that they're like Melinda, they use ultra energy efficient appliances, use sustainable packaging. You can buy packaging now that isn't made from plastic, that actually will compost in just a straight compost heap, not an industrial composter. Use our purchasing power. NHS Western Isles, brilliant sustainability report. How much of the food that serves in their canteens is actually purchased from the local community? Caller, purchasing power. Anna talked about purchasing power in her talk last year. And actually, let's hold their feet to the fire there. Let's get the caller, let's get the schools, let's get the carers. Every carer who has a carer attending someone in the home, they should be bringing food that's been produced in the islands to those people to get nutritious, healthy food that's of the best quality. Let's get tourism businesses buying local produce and selling it and using it in their kitchens. If we're going to have this big energy transition, which I hope we are, let's utilize those community funds. Let's buy some of these blast freezers. Let's get these systems across the island chain so that we can actually draw these things together, to connect the dots, like Frank was saying. Community Land Outer Hebrides, congratulations, Shona, on your new role. I'd love to have a conversation with you about how we can encourage the Community Land Trust and Development Trust to work together, and maybe even look at getting a cooperative of producers. Outer Hebrides, this is the OH-COP, but we have OH-COP brackets communities, which are like working groups. So we're going to establish a working group to take some of all these discussions. We'll engage with the wider community, we'll get more evidence, we'll develop plans. We'll take this through the community planning partnership, we'll be looking at the funding mechanisms, we'll develop a business case, we'll develop project delivery plans, and we'll report this time next year at OH-COP2, and I look forward to those discussions.
Is this the one that's on? Is it on? No? That one? Yeah. So let's just go straight to the floor and take any questions on anything you said there. I mean, I'm really glad that you mentioned the Community Land Trust before you. I meant to mention that myself. It's interesting to note, for those who don't know in the audience today, we have participants from Galston Estate, Carloway Estate, Barvas Estate, Stornoway Estate, all community owned. I don't know if there are any other estates here, but those four are certainly here. And land trusts are much more than just about land these days, and that's a critical issue for this conference. So 8 questions. One right at the back there. Just wait till Heather gets to you. Should.
As a crofter, for generations, my family have slaughtered between 6 and 10 sheep a year to supply meat to various members of the family. And I understand the challenges that the coroner face. But this year, the cost of cut and kill in the slaughterhouse is £60 an animal. And more small crofters who have 20 or 30 animals are saying, well, I'm either going to revert to home kill, or I'm just not going to bother at all. So, because we know the financial pressures the council are under, but at the same time, it would be good if they were able to take a long-term view over things like that and realize that how discouraging it is to crofters that they're not able to do that.
It's not just that. I think I was saying the other day there that there are 100,000 less sheep than there were 20 years ago on this island. In this island alone, 100,000 less than there were. The bottom has fallen out of the market there and that sort of stuff there. So you're looking at, I don't see why in the longer term, we shouldn't be looking at the abattoir as a community facility that's run not for profit, but for the benefit of the people using that. In the same way, as I said, we invest in roads and we invest in piers and we invest in harbours. All of these things benefit the whole community, not just those who happen to be using it at the time. You don't get charged every time you stand at the pier to look at the Kalmac boat coming in. Have you any response to that?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, kind of raising those concerns around community action and ownership in the community and building cooperatives that, have value for everybody that's involved.
I mean, I think it's a really important point, Donald, because, I mentioned facilities in my talk, and you hear the slogan from local authorities, use it or lose it. And you kind of think, I understand the financial pressures on the local authority, but I also understand that, as a community, this is a crofting community. It's one of the reasons why I moved here. And, I joked about Brixton, but they wouldn't let me keep pigs in Brixton, but they did in Borv. And so I was able to start making charcuterie in Borv that led on to the founding of Hebrides Charcuterie with Melinda. And that skill wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have been able to have that direct link between, and you yourself helped me fence in the pig area, and then we didn't. But that's another story for another day. But I think the bit about community benefits, if we're having this big transition, and if these big community benefit funds are being put forwards, let's not build another car park with them. All right, let's use them for things that are sensitive to the community and reflect the community's needs and aspirations. And I went to the Crofting gathering in Stornoway a couple of months ago, and the guy from US, again, I'm terrible with names, but he said, look, 2 generations ago, these islands were self-sufficient for food, apart from things like tobacco, sugar, and coffee and tea, but everything else you could get locally. And we've lost that in 2 generations. So we have to get that back. Especially if, we're going to have these extra storm days that are coming in the winter. Up to 9 extra storm days. Boats aren't going to come with food on them.
Yeah, but the temptation is to get too simplistic on that. We didn't grow our own tomatoes 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 2 generations ago. We didn't bring our own bananas across and that sort of stuff there. So there's a whole issue. It's not black and white. It's highly nuanced. But my point about the abattoir, in response to that one, for example, is these are community facilities. In other parts of Scandinavia, these are regarded as in the same way as a school building. It belongs to the whole community. It's not a private enterprise. We are, this is, you maybe shoot me down in flames, but we'll go for it anyway. We are still living with the criminal damage that was started by Margaret Thatcher privatizing things. And these things were all privatized, and they're gone from the community control. British Airways, British Steel, British Gas, everything is gone. And they're now making millions of pounds profits. Rather than thinking about these things as belonging to the community and the community using those things. If it was in Scandinavia, they would be saying, this belongs to the community, we can use that. The learning centres around the place, they're owned by the municipality. The municipality is funded by government to run these things. So we should be making the bullets for the correlate to fire to the government to say this is an issue of local importance, not just a thing about you can pass. And if you're serious about these things, we had a whole series. One of the things about living long enough is you see all these things going around in circles. And the good thing about being a writer is that you have these things down on paper. So when people say to me, you're saying that now, I can pull out a thing that said this 40 years ago. Yeah? Written down, we said this. We've had Immersnick and North, the initiative at the edge. We've had the species at the edge now with wildlife protection and whatnot. There's these buzzwords that can continually get floated up through government circles of right, left, and centre, let's face it. Because they're convenient to hang a tag on that you can park that thing and go away and do what you want to do. And we have to start delivering on these things because these things actually mean life and death for communities within this part of the world. There must be more questions. Yeah. See one down here, huh? Just right in front. Just wait till the microphone comes to you. I have to tell my daughters frequently that even I don't believe everything I say, so it's useful to provoke the argument. So that was one at the back there as well.
Thank you, Donald McKinnon.
Donald, shoot.
Donald McKinnon, Carloway Estate Trust. Just want to congratulate John on the images. They are just incredible and really quite inspirational what you've managed to achieve with your Croft. And I think some really interesting parallels with how crofts were worked in the past here and on a much more intensive basis and producing a lot more food. So it's really interesting from that perspective. At the moment, the Scottish Government are developing a new agricultural policy and a new system of agricultural payments. I was wondering if we could get some reflections from you on how the current system is supporting your business at the moment and what you think the new system needs to do to support businesses like yours and to encourage more people to build crofting businesses like your own. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think moving here, I'm not originally born on the island. I moved from England, and coming into the crofting world, I was unaware of the depth of the structure and how it worked and all the organisations that are involved in the crofting legislations and funding. I think this is organ. But over the last 8 years, we've kind of learnt how crofting works and who's involved in what and how to access support and funding. But in the beginning, I came into crofting without the mindset that I would take funding. We funded most of the projects ourselves in the beginning because we believed, well, it was our benefit. It was for our family. We were growing our own food, so why should we be taking funding that comes from the government or the European Union? But having now worked and developed with the community, we see that the funding isn't just for us, it's also for the wider community. So we now run workshops that have developed and we can educate others in the community with that funding. So the current system for us has been quite giving. We've been quite lucky and had a lot of support through organisations, but I think we built up a good rapport with a lot of the local organisations before we started getting, the larger funds. So the Farm Advisory Service, for instance, they came to us and asked if we could do some talks and a wee video on our croft. And following that, they helped us to access funding to gain a Heb crop. So a few years ago, we managed to put a Heb crop in, which has now enabled us to grow a wider diversity of food. We can start off seeds much early in the spring, and it really does increase the production on the croft. Following that, we've now got a croft that has turned over money every year for the last 5 or 6 years, and we have records to prove that. So going forward and accessing funding is now achievable. We have a basis to go off. So the current system, we actually, the Scottish Crofting just changed some of their, CAG's just changed some of their funding schemes for fencing, for instance. Some of you might be aware you don't need to apply for quotes to get fencing now, and we were lucky enough to apply for deer fencing. We're the first crofters probably on the island to get deer fencing now to protect our market garden, and that's only through having the basis of the business. So I hope that answers your question.
Another question here.
Thanks. Is this on?
Should.
Rod, I've just moved back to the island and engineer and involved with the Green Party. Quite hippie and tree huggy, Frank, you used the term bullets for the council. Are you suggesting maybe we need a paramilitary force to bring back autonomy and if we were to take care of some of the infrastructure here ourselves and offer protection for it, would that give us much more decision-making power where it currently resides, maybe in Westminster?
Yeah, you have to be careful with your words these days. I'm very much anti-violence, as you know. But the basic premise is the case that I think we need to take much more individual action. We've heard, those of us who know more about it than me, but who have been involved in renewable energies will know about the debacle, about the interconnector cable between the mainland and whatnot, and the failure and the delay in taking to get the cable across to the mainland, to take the power across to the national grid. About even if a new cable goes in, it's already talking about not having enough capacity to do with community-owned, renewable turbines and whatnot as well. It doesn't make sense to me that we should be looking at exporting the energy. If we are saying that this is one of the European centres for the production of renewable energy through wind and through solar, for that matter, then we should be saying, what can we use that for here? And then we sell the surplus for profit into the grid. And we should be looking at district heating schemes for all the community-owned properties, every school, every hospital, every doctor's surgery. We should be looking at EV buses, EV taxis, right on the whole place, and going for that, because we are an island community and we could do that. And so the idea, I mean, even if we had a big enough interconnector, you're still relying upon the company who runs the network giving you a fair price for that. And if you turn around and say, we don't want your power today, then you're stuck. So it doesn't make sense to me. So I'm thinking, in terms of actually community engagement and individual engagement, we should actually be actively labouring for much more engagement at a grassroots level, if you pardon the pun, with the issues of climate change and climate mediation. Because these are things that are going to affect us. And the beauty of, and this is why we mentioned the community trust estates, the community trust land estates, by definition, have a long-term vision. They're managing the area, not just the land, but the Crofting land particularly, but the land, the housing areas. They're able to make land available for housing, for retail premises, and for social housing and so on within the community. They're able to do that at their own hand, and therefore they're able to actually bring that result, that benefit, right down to community level. These are things that were not possible before. And so these are things that we need to actually give them the ammunition, if you like, the education, the verbal ammunition, the facts, the figures, the people turning out to support them to make those changes happen. Because we know what we need to do, by and large. Although the issues of climate change are huge and complex, actually, the things that we need to do to mitigate and for adaptation, to cope with the current problems, are well known. They just get shelved because, it'll be my kids and my grandchildren that have to worry about that, not me. I'm fine just now. I'm okay. I'll carry on as normal. And that is the problem. We have to break that mindset in order to repair it, in my view. Mary Ann. Just wave your hand if you want more. There's one down here as well. Yeah, on you go. Mary Ann, on you go.
Can I go?
Sure.
Really loud. Sorry, can I go first? My question is about local food. I'm here today to talk about something else in the afternoon, but I have been involved with local food production for the past 25 years. And the question is open to anybody on the panel, but to cut food miles and its carbon footprint, can anybody see that the council and the local health board might one day buy local food for the school canteens or the hospitals for their patients?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I know Ian McKeever's at the back. Ian and I were involved in the Scottish Crofters Union in the early days, and we were labouring when Tesco's were building, to get them to buy local food. And they came up with, we met some of the senior people over the years that came to the island for that and told us, and we solved one problem and they found another problem. And it was only when the Co-op built their new premises out the road there, and they said they were going to buy local lamb, that it was only within the month Tesco were doing it as well. So purchasing pressure is a huge one. My big discovery is tomatoes in the crop. We have so many tomatoes this year that we can't cope with them, and I've gone full Italian, really.
So yeah, I think it comes down to demand, and support from the council. If the council invests in local products and local enterprises, then it has a personal interest to support the community and build upon that.
Obviously, here in an extreme climate, it's stability of produce that's very hard to maintain across a whole season. So you need a flexible system where locals can sell when they have a glut of produce, but at the same time, we still have the security for the wider population to access food year-round.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're establishing the OH-COP Communities Group on this, to really get people like you, Marianne, and others around the room, directly from crofters themselves, but also some of the people who are in the purchasing positions. It is that people are saying to council, yes, that's probably true in some instances, but it's also, the local schools and other people as well that might have direct purchasing responsibilities. And I'm not certain as to the whole layout across all of the islands. And that's why we need to have that collaboration. So I'll be following up with you after this. But I'll also be encouraging, as I say, people like Outer Hebrides Tourism to be involved, and also NHS Western Isles.
We're running out of time here, but there's a lady very patiently waiting in the front here, so on you go.
I just had a very quick question about the slides that you put up about the climate predictions for 2060 to 80 or whatever. And I noticed that Stornoway currently in the summer, the average was about 12 degrees. And then on your slide, it said like 2 or 3 degrees. Is that meant to be the change, or was that they're expecting that this is jet stream breakdown and it's going to suddenly become 2 degrees in the summer? Or what was, I was just a little confused about that.
Short response.
Yeah, I think I'll come and talk to you about it there, but I think what I showed was the 4 seasons, and then each of the columns were the Stornoway, Uist, Barra, and then across the rows there, it showed what the current rainfall and temperatures are for each of the seasons, and then and so on. So there shouldn't have been a drop from 12 to 2. I'll have a look at that with you, and if there is, then I kind of need to look at my slides again. But I use the information from the Met Office, and it's not to do with the AMOC collapse or anything like that. It's actually just that the climate has already changed in many respects. And in fact, if you travel between Barra and Stornoway, you'll notice the difference in just the weather alone.
Even between the East Coast and the West Coast. The palm trees on the West Coast, of course. So we have to break for lunch just now. I know there'll be more questions. I'm sure there will be. You have to wave enthusiastically in the second half. But if you want to pick up any questions with anybody that's spoken this morning, do so at lunch. Back here at 1:20 to resume the afternoon session. Thank you for your attention.